Hey, everybody, this is Jon Sherwood, host of the Unpolished Church podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Today, I have the privilege of being able to talk with a couple of our microchurch pastors from our network about the topic of money in church. Why is it so difficult to talk about money in church and in church community? What are the things that cause us shame and guilt and regret about how we handle money, prevent us from being generous, prevent us from being good stewards of all that God has given us? Please welcome Martha Brown and Kathy Gibbons as we dive into a very touchy subject, a very vulnerable one, and one that I hope can be enriching and empowering for you as you walk with Jesus faithfully in your community. Thanks again for joining us here on Unpolished. Please like and subscribe. Let's jump into the episode. Martha, Kathy, thank you so much for joining me here on Unpolished. Grateful to have you.
Well, great to be here. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Jon.
So we're just going to jump right in as we typically do here on Unpolished. I thought we could talk about one of the easiest and least touchy subjects known to humankind, especially in the Christian church, and that is the topic of money, something Jesus never talked about, never touched on, or upset other people about. So thank you for being willing to do such an easy episode with me.
Sure, anytime, Jon.
You're welcome.
Right. So before the show, we're like, what are we going to talk about? I don't know. We don't have any notes. So thank you guys for joining us and bearing with us in this conversation. But this all actually came about because Kathy, you and I were having a conversation as we were doing a generosity practice and spiritual discipline in our network for several months at the end of last year. And you were sharing a little bit about how that practice was shaping you and impacting you, the things you were learning, the things you were wrestling with, regrets perhaps from the past. And as we were talking about this, I thought, man, this would be so great for us to just have a public conversation, because I thought, the things you were describing, I know are so common and such a experience that's common to so many Christians. And it's something that we talk so little about, which I know is one of the things you and I were talking about, Kathy, is just how little this is discussed in church world. And so here we are trying to talk about it in church world and Unpolished. So thank you again for being willing to do this in a public way. But Kathy, maybe I could just invite you to sort of share a little bit about that experience as you were doing this generosity practice, the things that the Lord was showing you and bringing up to the surface of your mind and heart, and just kind of jump in there a little bit about the backstory of how we got here to this conversation.
Sure. So when we were beginning the generosity practice, I was actually dreading this particular one because I knew that there were some things I needed to confess and I needed to change in my life. And to me, it just seemed like the perfect time to just become open and share about it and make the changes that needed to be made. But a little background is we had amassed quite a bit of credit card debt, and we were managing it for the most part. We weren't late on any payments, but it really felt like all of our money was going to pay off this debt every month. And when we started to think about being generous and helping out in our community and, using our money in that way, it really felt, it convicted me because I knew that we couldn't be generous. And so that's when I, had my conversation with you, Jon, to just share that this is where we are. And it's really a thing that needs to be fixed in our lives. And so we prayed a lot about it. And we went into a debt consolidation situation and just really focused over most of last year to get all of this debt finally paid off and negotiated and what they can do to help you. So, so that was kind of just my eye-opening awakening to needing to really change in the money situation.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Kathy. And obviously, so proud of you and Rick, your husband, and just so proud of you guys both being willing to, share honestly, even in a public format. I think this is one of the things that creates such a hurdle, right, is that we feel shame, we feel embarrassment about our sin, about our shortcomings, whatever those may be. And it tends to keep us in the dark, keeps us from being honest, transparent, vulnerable with others. And more often than not, keeps us from actually making progress and changing and experiencing the refreshment that comes from repentance. And so I just wanted to say again, thank you guys so much for being willing to have this conversation. Hopefully it can inspire others to do the same in their context and with the relationships that they have around them. But just for some more context and backdrop here, Kathy, for our audience that may be unfamiliar, you've been in church settings for a long time, been walking with the Lord and being a disciple of Jesus and a follower of Jesus for many, many years. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, about what it was like, coming to this stage in your life and this stage in your faith walk and coming to these new convictions around finances, around generosity, around really fighting to deny yourself to be in a position to better help and serve and give to others around you. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that as it relates to like your broader, more, longer history of following Jesus.
Okay. I guess, we had access at our prior congregation to some classes on finance. I think Dave Ramsey's class was offered. At the time, we weren't interested in making any change, and nobody even asked us about it. We didn't have any conversations with leadership or any of our friends and other disciples because it was just not something we were ready to share, I guess. And it takes years to get into the situation that we were in. And I do wish, looking back, that we would have had the chance to change the habits way earlier. But, we were in part of a very large church, so it was easy to blend in without having to, put your hand up to say, I need this help. And if you didn't put your hand up, then people aren't going to know that you need the help. So I think that's the part where I think it might be helpful in our smaller context is to be able to have these conversations individually with people that we are leading or just walking through this time with, in this season, to just get people to think about it. So I wish now that I had been able to continue to actually get the help that we needed through other disciples and do it in a godly way to be able to get out of debt, to get out of some bad habits that I had. Yeah,
I was going to ask about that. You mentioned some hurdles and bad habits and things that had accrued over a long period of time. Maybe you can share, if you're open to that, just maybe some of those things that you face that you think may be common that other people face too, other financial hurdles or bad habits that develop that, you wish now in hindsight you would have been able to be open about and seek help with much sooner.
Okay, where do I start?
Maybe just choose the top one or two that comes to mind.
Okay, so we've had some issues with having to live paycheck to paycheck throughout our lives. I always worked, but I didn't make a lot of money. But then I got a better job and I started getting lots of offers for credit cards, and we started to live. Even though we were making more money, we were living beyond our means still. We didn't change how we were borrowing from Peter to pay Paul almost every month, but it switched over to doing it through using credit cards. So we would buy things, we would have those payments, then we wouldn't have enough to pay our rent or mortgage. So we would use, credit to do it. And it just compounded over time. And,
I think as you're talking, sorry to cut you off there, Kathy,
You're
but
good.
one thing that came to my mind is just the living outside of your means, right? Like buying things and choosing to spend money that inevitably you don't have, and how that is the great trap and lie of the credit and debt system. That the opportunity that we have to take on debt because it's afforded to us, right? Like you were saying, as we earn more money, we're actually given the opportunity to spend even more money than we have through debt, systems like credit card companies. And of course, that's how they make their money. It's this really ironic system of, offering us to spend more money is actually how they make money off of us. And how common that is for so many in our context, because it feeds our desire of greed. To want more is like a very basic human nature thing, right? And these credit systems are designed to prey off of that in a very like sinister way, in my opinion. And yet it's something that's so common that the basic idea of actually living below our means, like actually spending less than we actually have, is one of the easiest ways to not take on especially traditional consumer debt for material items. There's different kinds of debt. Obviously, like most people probably aren't going to drop cash to buy a home or a car or be able to pay for, higher education degrees out of pocket necessarily. So there's varying levels of types of debt, but for traditional consumer debt, which I think is kind of what you're talking about, which is where we're using credit cards to buy material goods that we don't really need for the sustaining of our life, but we want them, and we go into debt to get them, and then that debt continues to compound, and before you know it, we are struggling to now actually provide the things we do need to sustain our basic living, because we've become enslaved to these debt collectors and these debtors, and how even common that is in the Christian church. And I know you mentioned Dave Ramsey and his course, Financial Peace, which was really popular and I believe still is, and offers a lot of great practical insights and advice. And I think in many ways, its greatest gift is just that it gets people talking about it and being involved in each other's lives in an intimate way around their finances, which is so taboo in America, right? The two most common fights in a marriage are around sex and money. And that's because those are the most intimate, touchy, difficult, things about our lives and hearts that touch so deeply in some of our sinful natures. And I think, even though I think there are some things that Dave Ramsey teaches that I don't necessarily agree with or think are best, I think just the very step of getting Christians talking about their finances with other Christians is like a huge win. And I think that's kind of what got this podcast episode started. And really what sprung the idea was you were saying, hey, like, I don't know that we've ever really talked about this in our decades of following Jesus and being in church. And here we are brought to an environment where we're like being called to talk about it, or talk about generosity, which is so connected to obviously our finances.
Right.
And I remember, Kathy, you saying, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but I remember you telling me that we were having a special collection as a network that we do every year to help fund some other initiatives around the community and special initiatives in our microchurches and things like that. And I believe it was during the generosity practice or right around it. And you told me that you were considering donating to the fundraiser with debt, like by charging it onto a credit card, and then recognizing like, wait a minute, I'm giving the church money I don't actually have. That's probably not helping me or the church. And that really resonated with me when you said that. And that was something that became highlighted in your mind, and that like that arrested you, and you were like, wait, something's off here. Something's broken, where I'm having to borrow money from Paul to give to Peter. I've actually never heard that euphemism. That's really funny. But maybe you could talk about that for a minute. And then Martha, I'd love to chat with you a little bit too about some of the things that Kathy was saying in terms of the leadership component of instilling cultures in Christian communities that talk about money, as I know you've been in leadership circles in many different churches. And so I look forward to talking about that more in a few moments. But Kathy, if you wanted to respond or talk a little bit about that dynamic where you realize, like, I have a heart that wants to give, but I'm going about it in a way that's actually not helpful and detrimental.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that was sort of the eye-opening moment for me of, wait a minute, something's got to change here. And I think that you had actually done a sermon on the Sunday, maybe it was a month before, maybe it was even Generosity Sunday. And you actually said, don't go into debt to give on Generosity Sunday. And I was like, oh, yeah. And I'd probably done that a couple of years in a row, maybe, you know? And so God worked it out to where we got some money that came from somewhere, you know, somebody died, and we got about the exact amount that we wanted to give for Generosity Sunday. And so that's what we used this year, or 2025. But yeah, that's exactly what actually got me really thinking we've got to do something.
Thank you again for sharing all that. You know, Martha, as we're, I wanted to invite you onto this call because obviously I know that you've had a lot of experience as well in leadership roles. You and your husband served as elders in a previous church. You guys have been microchurch pastors and a part of the network leadership here, and are poised to become microchurch pastors again here soon. And you've been in a lot of different contexts, and you guys have, been, I think, by most standards, fairly successful in your lives and your career as you guys are nearing the end of your careers and looking at retirement here soon. Woo woo. We were talking a little bit about the role of money and finances in a Christian community, and what your experience has been like that, and how do we lead in such a way that we can try to remove some of the negative stigmas to afford people the opportunity to talk about it freely and without shame and judgment, but like we would want to do this with any other topic in human existence, in the church community and Christian community, that we want to be able to dialogue in healthy and productive ways to help each other follow Jesus more closely, and even follow him more closely in the realm of our wallets and bank accounts and 401ks and all of this. And so maybe you can share a little bit about just, as you're hearing Kathy share, and as we've been talking a little bit offline about the role of finances in our church network, and how do we lead in such a way to try to cultivate this kind of culture? What things come to your mind and heart, and what things have you seen in your years of following Jesus around the issues of church and money?
Well, first, Kathy, I'm just so grateful for you, for your vulnerability and sharing your story and opening your heart and letting us learn from what you're learning and how God is working in your life. And I see so much the Spirit at work in you, because you've heard things said along the way, but I think the Spirit really perked your ears and pricked your heart to listen in a new way. And that's been so freeing for you and Rick, and that you've experienced greater joy in your life because of listening to the Spirit and seeking out wisdom about this. So I just think you're a great example, and I'm so glad to be able to witness this in your life and all the ways your lives are transforming. I think I see finances as a source of great shame for people. I've been there. I've been in shame with debt before. And I know what that feels like, to want to hide behind the things that we're ashamed of, and to not bring those things into the light in our Christian walk. And I think, society shames us for debt. It assigns us to classes based on how much money we have. Like, nobody says, I'm happy being low class. It's like, no, I want to be upper class. How can I get to the upper class? Because it implies a worth and a value to us that God never assigns to us. There are no classes in God's kingdom. We're all the
Amen.
same. And so I think part of the great freeing work of God in our lives is to realize that we are valued and loved by God no matter what's going on, that we may feel shame about. And his plan for us is to bring healing for those things. I think that as leaders in the church, we really need to be sensitive to the fact that people are coming from a place of shame, and be careful not to add to that shame in any way, but to explore reaffirming someone's worth and value to God, and starting from a place of respect and not condemnation for maybe poor choices. Or I think a lot of times we think it's poor choices, and there's a stigma with that of you just made poor choices and that's why you are where you are. But fact is, many people endure a lot of hardship in their life, and that leads them to this place, but they still feel the shame and the stigma of it. And so coming at it from a place of respect and grace and empathy for, wow, this has been quite a road you've been on, and let's figure out how to walk this together and how I can support you as you recognize God's power in your life to have a different way forward. And I think we just have to be super careful to not imply judgment and not imply shame on people that are already drowning in shame. And I think when we can create that kind of a healthy, loving environment, it's so much easier to come into the light and to imply that we trust people to make the right decisions, best decisions going forward. Then we're just there to support them. I think that really opens the door for people to feel safe and to come into the light. And it's not just with money. It could be in any area that we feel shame about, where we have to know we're going to find support and not condemnation or criticism or judgment.
Right. That's right. And I think for me, what comes to my mind is also the theology of getting out of debt. Like you were talking about, Martha, the motive of why Christians get out of debt is imperative, and that our primary motive for getting out of debt cannot be so that we can become a higher class economically. The goal of getting out of debt isn't so that we can have more stuff for ourselves, right? The idea of getting out of debt theologically is that we can be, one, that we're living a life of self-control and self-discipline and self-denial for the purposes of loving others, of loving neighbor, right? That all Christian motivation needs to be driven from love, a love of God and love of neighbor. And so love of neighbor should inform the choices that I make economically and financially. I think of even Romans 13, where Paul says, let no debt remain outstanding except for the continual debt of love. This idea that Paul's instructions to the communities of Christians there in Rome, and I think this is consistent with all of his epistles, that as Christians, we shouldn't be taking on debt and allowing it to remain outstanding, right? That our goal is to live in such a way that we are not living outside of what we have. And in fact, we should intentionally be living under what we have so that we can be poised to be able to be generous and give to others, which of course I know, Kathy, as you were mentioning, was really a lot of the catalyst for all of this for you to say, hey, we want to get out of debt and work our way towards that so that we can be generous, not so that we can have more money to enjoy ourselves, right? And we're not having to give so much over here to bank X or credit lender Y. So now we can really live it up, but the Christian motive of remaining debt-free as much as possible is for the love of neighbor and the love of other, not so that we can climb some ladder of economic stratus, right? And I think that's vitally important. Because sometimes I think debt consolidation or debt removal or freedom from debt can be framed by, well, now you get to really live the life that you always wanted to live, and what that translates to often is like a selfishness. And that's still counter to Jesus. Like you could still be selfish and not have debt, and you still miss the boat on the Christian thing. You know what I mean? And so maybe if you guys wanted to remark on that a little bit of just the theology and the the pure motive that we as Christians should have, and maybe those listening in these realms where there can be so much shame and so much regret and hurt. And like you mentioned, Martha, I mean, it's not like debt doesn't always occur because of bad choices. Sometimes there are just hardships that come upon us, and tragedies happen. And, so you definitely don't want to paint with a singular brush here to go, oh, all debt that anyone faces is because you are making selfish choices. That's certainly not true. Unfortunately, it is true, I think, far too often, even in Christian communities. But it's certainly not the only pathway that we can end up in debt to one another, or to, the big corporations more than likely. So maybe if you guys want to comment a little bit about that and how that resonates for you and what's kind of surfacing for you.
Well, I was just I don't know if this might be a little bit of a tangent, but what Martha was talking about, shame. If you surround yourself with a close-knit family of believers like we have with our microchurch, when we admitted this to our group one Sunday, the love and support we got was amazing. And the fear that I had to put this in the light just melted away. So that I wanted to just bring up, because if you have people that love you, they only want to support you. And they want to help you. And so don't be afraid to bring something that is bothering you, and especially with money, into the light. And I'm sorry, I forgot your actual question.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. Kathy, what helped you think, overcome that fear and have the courage and bravery to be able to bring that into the light of other trusted Christian brothers and sisters?
I think just having built the relationships with everyone and knowing in my heart that, they would be there for me no matter what. And also I had been working on my timidity over the past several months prior to that. So it was just something that I knew was a challenge that I wanted to face and bring this out in the light. And so, yeah.
Amen. Martha, how about for you? What's resonating for you right now, and what's being highlighted in this conversation for you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that we need to live lives that position us to be generous and to give and to love people with the resources we have. I think that's got to be our motivation, and it's very aspirational. I think that goal can seem so far off for people. It can feel like I'll never get there. How could I ever get there? And I think that God always makes a way when we are open, when we seek help, when we have hearts that want to get there. God will get us there. It's been my experience. I've seen it in the lives of so many other people, where we can never outgive God. We can never underestimate, what God is able to do in our lives. So there's that. And I think there's another motive too of honoring God, not just being able to give, but having lives that are worthy of respect from outsiders. I think that living in a debt-free way or in a responsible way financially is very countercultural, and it does earn respect of outsiders and position us to provide hope to other people and call them into the light, because it's so freeing to live in the light in that way.
So generosity and living inside of our means is a very countercultural, kingdom of Jesus subversive way to the kingdoms of the world. Why does it not look more like that in the churches? In the Church of America, why do you think, Christians are still in as much debt as those who proclaim to not be Christians, or perhaps more so sometimes? Why do you think that happens? Or what are some of the main hurdles that keep Jesus followers from being countercultural to the ways of the world in this particular fashion?
Well, um, I am so glad to hear Kathy say that she was welcomed with love and support in bringing her story into the light with the group. And I think a lot of people have not had that experience, and I think that I know I didn't have that experience. I mean, it's been 30 years for us since we really had to come to terms with our debt, but we felt a whole lot of shame and a whole lot of kind of coercion about it. And so I'm glad that the church is maturing, and that I know this group that Kathy's a part of, we're mature people. You know, we've all had our own struggles. And so I think we have created a safe environment where we all have been humbled by life. And so I think that's something I would like for everyone in churches to understand, is that we've got to be humble with each other and create a safe space that's not judgmental and not shaming. So I think also we just want what we want, and we're afraid to relinquish control, because how we manage our money is a very strong source of control that we have in our lives, and we have to bring that under the lordship of Jesus. And it's a touchy topic to talk about, of you know, is Jesus Lord of your bank account, and how would that reflect in how you live your life and make your choices? Because we are inundated with such materialism and such affluence in the world that we live in, and we see things as normal that really aren't normal in the scope of history and in the scope of a greater worldview. The affluence that we have is way beyond what's normal. What our parents had and our grandparents had, we live with so much more abundance, and so we expect that, and so it's our sense of worth has to get recalibrated to be found in Jesus and in our walk with him, and not in our comfort or what we have, and how we compare with other people, that sense of security that possessions can provide if we allow it to, or seek that out. Yeah.
I think what Martha said, when you said the word control, that's what really stuck out to me. And it comes from both sides. So we want to control our lives. We don't want to trust Jesus 100% with all aspects. But then there's also the side of it of leadership. And there's a fine line between bringing this topic up to your congregation in a loving way and coming across like you want to control what people do with their money. So I think that is probably the biggest reason why a lot of church leadership, in a lot of churches, the leadership doesn't bring up money if they are afraid that it's going to be taken in that context.
Yeah. And then obviously there's the really bright neon reason too, I think, is, you know, there's so much scandal. There's so much, experience and things that people can point to where money has not been handled well by Christian leadership, or pastors, you know, extort their congregation for private jets and, 14 homes across the globe, and extravagance and opulence that's, on a scale that's hard to even imagine and fathom sometimes. And this turns people off, not only from church, but more importantly from Jesus himself and from the gospel of Jesus. And, I think there's so much just blatant hypocrisy around church and money that I think it can be such a touchy subject. And then when we get into our own personal lives, it's such a touchy subject because, like you said, Martha, we want what we want. And, a lot of times we are afforded things that seem normal that really just aren't or shouldn't be. And I think this is a part of our heart in even having this conversation, for those that may be listening or viewing, to say, hey, there can be a different way. Like, the way of Jesus is often a different way than the way of the world, the broad road that leads to destruction. And in the subjects and the topics of money, I think some of the countercultural things that we can do, and I think first and foremost is just start studying the scriptures and the gospels around the teachings of Jesus and money. Like, so much of Jesus' message was economic. It's mind-blowing. And it's so convicting, even to me. And it's interesting how little, I think on the whole, how little that was really baked into how the gospel was preached to me when I first became a Jesus follower in my earlier 20s. Listen, let me be clear. The gospel is difficult to pin down, right? Like, it's not a singular thing. It's so multifaceted and so multi-layered. It's like that proverbial diamond that every time you turn it, it looks different and it reflects the light differently. And that is the nature of following Jesus, is that his message of the kingdom is constantly turning and brightening and reflecting light in different ways as we mature, as we grow, as we follow him. And so that's inevitable. So I want to like contextualize or qualify what I'm talking about in terms of how I received the gospel. But the gospel that I received actually had very little to do with economics. And the more that I grow and the more that I read about Jesus, the more I'm challenged to go, actually, I think a lot of his message had to do with economics. It had to do with economics at the level of what it means for neighbor. Like, how you and I live as brothers and sisters in a community has very specific economic implications. We see this obviously in the early church, in the book of Acts and beyond into the early church fathers and patristic writings. And that is so otherworldly to our American 21st century context. That is bigger is better, right? Like, whether it's burgers and fries or buildings or homes or cars or whatever, we want more. And that's striking at something deep that's in each of our sinful natures. But I think one of the countercultural things we can do as Christians and in Christian community is, one, just start with the teachings of Jesus. Take some time in your small group, take some time in your personal Bible study, read about Jesus and money and economics. The second thing I would say that may be helpful as a countercultural step is open up your finances to someone else outside your home, right? Prayerfully consider a trusted, safe, mature brother or sister in the Lord and say, I would like for you to know about my finances. And I would like for you to have the ability to offer input into my finances, which means to be able to do that, you have to know about my finances and see the financial landscape with some degree of clarity. And I think that is so vulnerable. And as you've been saying, Martha, on this call, like, it's so important that be met with grace and with love and with support rather than condemnation and shame and guilt. And if we can find those safe environments, I think the Lord can lead us to incredible healing and incredible change and shift in the overall landscape of our lives that can allow us to then live with more freedom from debt, in a better position to be generous to others and love others around us, and to live with less of a sense of shame and self-worth that's tied to the wrong things like mammon and our bank accounts. And so, Kathy, maybe you could share here, kind of as we bring the plane in for a landing, just kind of what fruit you have seen from the decisions that you guys made to bring this part of your life and your walk into the light with other Christians and community. And how have you seen God work, and what has that led to, and what has been some of the positive fruit you've seen from that?
Well, it's been kind of, ramping up a little bit, as far as we're still in the middle of paying a lot of some of this off, but we have seen the ability to give, here and there where we see the need with friends and family. And if somebody is struggling, we had a couple in our church, where they needed a little help, and we didn't even think twice, and just having the support of our microchurch and the friends and our brothers and sisters has been really nice. And so I'm just looking forward to the day when we really are completely out of all of this, and can use our resources for God more so.
And how have you felt, like how have you and Rick felt just emotionally, mentally, spiritually? What has been the inner process for you as you have been wrestling with this area of repentance with the Lord? Like, how have you experienced Jesus just internally and at that personal level?
It's a huge weight that's lifted off of our shoulders not to have that. When it's time to pay the bills, you don't have that big weight on your shoulder to know, oh, well, there goes my paycheck. And it's been nice to be able to, have a cushion left in the bank account every month, So I guess that's probably the biggest thing, is just the weight lifted and the stress. It's not as stressful of a life when you're not struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah. Martha, how about for you? Any closing thoughts or just considerations maybe for an audience that's listening to this and considering, their own financial landscape and what that means for their own Christian community?
I think that one of the most empowering things we can do for ourselves is to get advice. I think we're afraid of losing control, but that fear holds us back, and we don't experience the weight coming off our shoulders that Kathy described when we're living in fear. So when we are able to come outside of ourselves, to bring things into the light, to get advice and advisors, and I think there's definitely a place for professional advice in many areas of our lives too, that we need to consider. But it's so empowering because it puts the responsibility on us. We stop blaming our circumstances, we stop blaming other people, and we say, God's given me the power to do something about this. I have God's Spirit in me. This can change. I can experience real freedom. So I would just encourage people to reach out for that joy, reach out for the load to come off your shoulders, and know that it can only come when you take responsibility and get the advice and get open.
And that Jesus wants us to live free, right? That Jesus, the Son, when he sets you free, you are truly free indeed. And so thank you so much, Martha. Thank you so much, Kathy, for joining me here on Unpolished to talk about this. I pray that we will continue to experience and pursue the freedom that we can only find in Jesus. And until next time, we'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Jon.